everybody. It is Mike Levin on October 4th, Monday, 2021. And I'm on my way back from having dropped my kid off. And I just got on I-95 North. And the rest of it is just kind of rote muscle memory, which I guess is a great way to kick off a video such as this, where much of what I'm promoting, preaching, evangelizing for no money, by the way. I'm not like selling anything. I'm kind of sort of exploring the money-making capabilities of YouTube, but I don't need to. I've got a great day job. I love me my day job, and sometimes my day job becomes my night job as I flip the day around, because the drop-off like this has to occur during the day because of, say, my kid's soccer practice. She has to be there in time, but I don't want to be returning her on a Sunday night, considering the 2-hour drive to get her there. It's nicer to bring her on Monday. So thank goodness the flexibility of a homeschooler, so I can, and the flexibility of my employer, so that I can drop her off, be there, watch the soccer practice, maybe have dinner with her, drop her off, and have some real good old times. Happens to be the middle of a business day on Monday, so what happens, I time shift a little bit. Now, of course, I'm going to be a bit tired when I get home, and it's hard to believe someone can double up on that and keep good health, especially when they're up in years the way they am, like me, a 51-year-old. So anyway, what I do is I put some time over the weekend, some good thought work into things, so that when I hit this tonight, I will be highly productive. And boy, have I been thinking about things, because, every once in a while, your daily grind, your day in, day out, not touched by the blessing of motivation and inspiration and insight, goes by, and then bam, it hits you. You got the inspiration, the motivation, and the insight. And for me, honestly, I have a little bit of a inferiority complex in the world of computer science. I did not go to school for a comp sci degree, although I did pick up a lot along the way. However, the difficult stuff usually defeats me. I consider it not worth it because it does not cut the muster of the 80-20 rule. Oh, that sounds like word salad. So what am I really saying? I believe in getting most of the benefit of things out of things up front, except for those things that you have deliberately decided to achieve over time through gradual mastery and expertise, so that you can finally pick the fruits of the very high trees, right? Those are skills you work towards over the years. Everything else that is just part of the daily, trials and tribulations of life should not be such large trials, is how I feel. The tribulations should be small. We're no longer hunter-gatherers putting our lives on the line to go out and bring down some animal to be meat for the winter, where some of your hunters could get killed. Now, that still happens occasionally. We, God bless us, have, the public servants who are in the life-threatening roles, such as police and fire people. And, it does take all kinds. That is not my kind. Nor am I a doctor wanting people's lives in my hands. Are you kidding? Nor do I want to have anything to do with people's food preparations. Now, I know certain people love it. That's their thing. They cook. They love to have people eat what they cooked. So I understand the appeal of all that. There's some interesting YouTubes out there of the husband-wife, duos who are clearly, complementary, shall we say, complement with a C-O-M-P-L-I, meaning they enhance each other. Husband and wife duos in that realm in YouTube. There's a lot on YouTube, and there is something for everyone. And it occurs to me that the things I'm doing is for a lot more people than the audience I'm reaching. It's gonna come, there will come a time, I call it the great Unix/Linux reckoning. I used to call it Nix, but you know, it's not explicit enough. It's too much of an insider term. When people from the outside hear you talking, they should go, oh, I get it. So the moment is a Unix/Linux point of inflection, where it's just assumed that every system you might be working on outside of the most, you know, specialized fields are going to boot from either a Linux, more commonly, kernel, like all Android devices, Chromebooks, or it's going to boot from a Unix kernel, as in all iPhones, and, well, I guess not really Windows yet, but Windows at some point is going to boot from either a Linux, more likely, a Linux kernel, or a Unix kernel. Because it doesn't make sense not to. And much of that Windows, you know, .exe stuff, much of that custom proprietary stuff down at the low machine levels is going to be gutted and replaced with, you know, the sum of human knowledge and experience in the realm of getting a variety of common hardware platforms booted, i.e. Linux, right? There's something about free and open source. It can become part of our genetic code. Licensing doesn't prohibit that. So, of course, when it becomes possible to encode digital into the DNA you pass down to your children, either literally in your very DNA or figuratively in some family heirloom, you know, set of containers with some running hardware of the generation's latest and greatest. So the units of computing that I have talked about in prior videos, you know, the UC of like the Intel NUC devices, you know, the, you know, cloud instance of a virtual server, right? Because, you know, there's always hardware. Cloud is not hardware. The cloud is hardware. The cloud is just other people's hardware with good APIs and probably good architecture, good system design put into it, so that all these neat tricks can be played, most frequently these days with containers, because containerization gives you better performance, better stability than virtualization. Boy, have I gone to war with sysadmins of old. You know, I hardly even want to get into it because I still have such bitterness around it. But, you know, there was a time when the virtualization game was possible in-house, and you could run a little VMware farm. Now, in those days, a company had to pay about $30,000 for the higher-end version of VMware called ESX Server, and if you didn't, you were using VMware Workstation, which, you know, basically you could get away with for free because the VMware player is free. So you just keep blanks of an operating system at the point where you start answering the configuration questions, and you can have as many copies of Windows you want with a free VMware player. So the sysadmin at the company liked this trick and kept all the various systems, including email and our public web server, running with this trick over my dead body. So I didn't let him take the public web server onto such a desktop, you know, type 2 virtualization soap bubble, as I liked to call them, because they were more frequently not running when they were supposed to be than actually running. So I was not, and continue to really not be, a fan of virtualization because of moving parts issues. There are way more moving parts. I remember one of the sysadmins at this company I worked for at the time, when I went to Server Wars, said, oh, doesn't that make it less moving parts with virtualization? I look at him like he's crazy. I think his name was Jason Call or something. I said, the overhead of 2 operating systems does not just mean the overhead of 2 operating systems. It means everything required to make those 2 operating systems actually run at the same time. So you got all kinds of exceptions and interrupts and overhead, and you take a hit on performance on just the root operating system, you know, and even more so on any guest operating systems, which are running in type 2 virtualization, which means there's no real guarantee against memory clashes and collisions and, sudden system failures. So I was not a fan of running, the way I made money, because I was making a percentage of company gross, not net. I was making a percentage of company gross. So it was very much in my interest that this company made money. So I was the public web server and also the intranet person. So I made the website, I published the website, I connected the website to lead management systems, taking in the leads that had discussion boards. Now, mind you, this was in about 2004. This might have been after the first .com bust, but even by then, I had created a Ruby on Rails-esque system out of the Microsoft IDC HTX system. It was proto-web development. It was a simple template system that works much like today's template systems. They're all the same thing. You've got a database connection of some sort. Even if it's to a local cache, you got a connection to a source of data that you can walk through as if you're opening a file, and then you fill it into fields. And there's a special syntax for defining those fields on a web page. Then you might have some simple looping mechanism, some simple if logic, and so there you have a template system. They had that back in 96, 97. It was really a long time ago, in the form of IDC for Internet Database Connectors from Microsoft, a web technology that worked with their active server at the time, active server page server, IIS, information server. And it was Microsoft's answer to the LAMP platform, Linux, Apache, MySQL usually Perl, PHP, and sometimes Python. So people didn't hear about Python much in those early web days, but that's because all the Python activity was taking place under a project called Django, which even lives to today in a very, very popular form. So PHP became very popular because WordPress was made on PHP, and its plugin ecosystem encouraged learning PHP to be a webmaster. A lot of people went that route. I did not. I was repelled by PHP as no step up from VBScript that I was coming from, which was Visual Basic Scripting Edition, which was the code in Active Server Page. So Active Server Page supported VBScript, which is the .asp files you still see around the web so much, and a JavaScript version of that. So there was JavaScript on the server long before Node.js. In fact, it goes back even further. JavaScript was on the server in the days of Netscape server. Netscape Commerce server used JavaScript. So JavaScript was born and died on the vine, or on the web, such as it were, 2 times before Node.js came along. It was out on the server in the very early days with Netscape, 97, I want to say, 98 at latest. And then it was out again as part of Microsoft's attack on Netscape with the Active Server Page technologies, which, used as its lead program language VBScript, which is the one I learned and really fell in love with and made my first real robust generalized Ruby on Rails framework system after the IDC HTX. The first one I did was, actually I wasn't even with that company at the time. I was with a different company that I had a little hiatus for. I worked a few years at company A, and then at company B for 2 years, and then back to company A for like an additional 4 years. So this was my early career, first job, quote, out of college, after the check cashing place, after that place where I had to shoot a guy. And then I was here for, 10 years, but with a 2-year stint where I made my first generalized system on VBScript, and that was Profit 21, and I made their intranet system, their public website system, their lead capture system, and I'm always playing with little tracking systems. I always was using the tracking GIF. I programmed those invisible GIFs when you talk about tracking GIFs, which are so much being disactivated these days when they're coming from a third-party domain than the publisher's own domain. Those can send all kinds of good information. Everything that came in on the original web page request that says, hey, show me this page from your website, everything about that request can be passed on to the tracking GIFs. And those tracking GIFs can say, oh, we've got a lead here from Japan, and they searched on plasma display applications. Oh, and look, they opened a please contact me message in the message board. And that turned out to be how that employer, Scala Multimedia, Scala Digital Signage, Scala from the Amiga days, became partners with NEC, and NEC became their, Far East distributor, their Asia and Pacific distributor, main distributor of the Scala Digital Signage multimedia software from the company I worked for that I described, that I had such a love-hate relationship with over the years. And so I really cut my teeth on SEO with Scala, but at Profit 21, later Activant, later got rolled up into Epicor. I was like, their webmaster, and I was like, hey, I made a order management system. It took orders and, told people what to ship to where. And meanwhile, this was, a multi-million-dollar software company that was doing exactly that, but with pre-web technologies, except, theirs is built for scaling and supporting large companies in special, circumstances. They were like a little SAP or a little Oracle or whatever. I don't know how many of them are left anymore, but these big business software companies have sort of dissolved away, and it's all around web-based apps now. They get gobbled up by each other, and like Oracle still owns a surprising amount more than anyone realizes, including the Java programming language. So anyone who's like really still on Java, really? I know the financial institutions are on it because they got in on early because of its promises. And, once you commit to a path, it's hard to uncommit. It's hard to back up and pivot and go in some other direction just because everyone who works for you knows this one way. And people are not that dynamic. You cannot say, hey, let's change to Python today because it's better than Java for this kind of work. No matter how much better Python might be for certain types of work, it will always be looked upon with vitriol and hatred and bitterness by a certain portion of the public static void, among the Java classes. I don't like it. It's not my vibe. So, Java and C++ in my various attempts to learn it were amongst those that defeated me. I was defeated by various programming languages because I would not give the commitment of myself that was required just to get to the next step, which is supposed to be the difficult part. So you got to get through the difficult part to get to the difficult part? No, thank you. So ever since VBScript, which I actually found quite pleasant, I have been backing off of languages that I tried to embrace. I tried to embrace Ruby when Ruby on Rails came along. Back when Guillaume Perrault, the person who became the vice president of that company, Scala, in Japan, a French guy living in Japan, who also found us through the website. So Guillaume found Scala through me, through pages I published on keywords he searched on. NEC found Scala through me, through pages I published, through keywords I targeted, plasma display applications. And the world has changed a lot since then. No one uses plasma anymore. I don't think LEDs have taken over everything. And now today, I believe even still, Guillaume works for Scala because there's a lot of NEC customers. So I connected the dots. Helped, I guess, get a good global distribution network maybe. And I did that through a agile framework I made. So after the Profit 21 one, I went back to Scala, my second stint at Scala. I made my first really robust one where it didn't require detailed configuration files, and it would basically say, show me your database, show me the top of your ERD diagram. And then I would go and inspect the primary keys and the foreign keys of the tables. So if you constructed your tables right, you just had an automatic little app that you could create master records, and you could add sub-records to a master record. And I think I supported, 3 levels deep, so you could go one more further than that. And I didn't make it recursive because I didn't want it to mentally blow up on people. But you could create ERD diagrams that were up to 3 levels deep, and then have an application just automatically spring to life by nature of having defined your database relationships and your foreign keys correctly, and everything got inspected, and there you have an app. And just like Ruby on Rails, you could start overriding its default behavior this way and that, and to customize it into a shopping cart, which is exactly what I did, or customize it into, shipping instructions, bill of materials, message board systems. It was a small tweak to make it a message board system, and message boards could hang off of any record. So a lead came in as a record, and then a record had a message optionally hanging off with it. Basically, the idea was every lead that came in should have a message hanging off with it, so that we could see that the lead was followed up on. Now, interestingly, this also was a perfectly suitable follow-up technique, saying, how have we been doing? Have we been in touch with you? Have you heard from us? And then suddenly people started answering in troves, and I was generating about 10 leads per day at the time, and it was revealed to all at Scala, i.e. the board of directors, that no one answered any sales leads. No sales inquiries got answered ever. Period. Now, I got paid a percentage of the company's revenues. So this used to infuriate me to no end. To no end. These are my stories. If you have the stories, tell them. So I was in my great 28s. I was at my peak. I was like, this is my big chance. I'm making a percentage of company gross here. And no one gets back to people who are inquiries off the web. Because there was this attitude that if a sales inquiry was coming off the web, it was not real. And so this was maybe 2004, 2005, just before I moved to New York. This was firing on all its cylinders. It was attracting leads, spiking discussions. It had even, pardon me, it had this feature that everyone in the company had this love-hate relationship with, where we could talk about the lead, but not to the lead. It was basically a secret back-end post. So, and then you could refer people into the discussions, because everyone in the company had access to it on the internal network. And so I could make it send out emails saying someone has a question for you. So I started allowing people in the company to peruse the sales leads and to send secret messages to people checkmarking who should be involved. Bing, 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 bing. And so suddenly people were being driven into these things going, oh, well, this person has a legitimate question. Why aren't they being answered? And I'm like, I don't know. Why aren't they being answered? And there was this electric tension in the air from this that almost burned the place down, okay? When it raised almost like to a musical crescendo, okay? With so many sales inquiries, because if you're talking 10 sales inquiries per day, that's, quite a few thousand sales inquiries, that can accumulate up pretty fast where people can say, oh, out of all these people who are interested, and look, they're not duplicates, your first comment is going to be these are different people. No, there's actual new interest. Do you know how invaluable that is? What gold that is? Even if they're not actually a big organization, they might be investigating for a big organization. You've got to embrace everybody who comes knocking at your door. You got to tell them your story. You've got to be happy to tell them your story. And you have to evangelize them. You got to send them back out going, oh, that was such a wonderful experience dealing with this little multimedia software company. You know, they make this software that runs those billboards that are basically TVs, but, you know, it's not just video playing. Sometimes it is, but just as often it's computer-generated graphics, which are being generated by something, some piece of software that must be like some kind of PowerPoint on steroids. People would say that phrase all the time. And indeed it was. It was a display engine that was like PowerPoint on steroids. And, you know, they were always the underdog. They came from the Amiga computer. They came from Commodore, so they weren't even all Amiga people at first. I believe a lot of them were just Commodore people. And then Commodore acquired this wacky Atari computer, this thing that, you know, did miraculous multitasking, you know, photorealistic things in 1987 and 88, before the whole, you know, internet web revolution, when it was geeky to do that stuff, when you were a nerd. And I so much did all this stuff for the first time. I did virtual reality back then through the Mandela virtual reality system with the very vivid software. There is John Vincent, and oh my God, the guy who wrote the software for the board. So for the Mandala board. So I was actually reaching out and playing harps and ringing bells around me in the kinds of things that usually only existed at museum exhibitions, and I was doing it on my personal computer at home because I was an Amiga person and I had the privilege to get my hands on some of this kooky stuff because I worked for Commodore at this time. So I was an Amiga freak. So I was so unaware of all the levels of stuff going on at Commodore, right from the ousting of the founder, Jack Tramiel. I just missed him. I didn't get to see any of the Jack attacks, but I was in this the residue, the aftermath of this golden home computer age, where the first, record-breaking home computer, like millions sold, kind of took place, and that was the Commodore 64. And I never really never owned a Commodore 64. I didn't go through that experience as a kid. It appealed to me. You know, I ended up with the Amiga computer. It was mostly my dad's decision, but all the more underdog. So I went from, not the Amiga, I said the Amiga, the Coleco Adam. Coleco Adam is what I was on first when I was 13 years old. So I went from Coleco Adam to Commodore Amiga. And always had some sort of superpower advantage, the better cartridge games on the Coleco Adam, but that was no big thing. I wanted to program, and it had this clunky cassette drive. So on the Amiga it was so much better, but even those days it didn't come with a hard drive. You were mostly working off of floppies. But, you know, over the years I had better Amigas. First one I really truly bought with my own money was the Amiga 1200. And that was after I went to the Bahamas to talk to the board of directors at the shareholder meetings. Twice I did that. At one of those meetings, someone was actually physically thrown out of the meeting. Richard Ashe. I don't even know if he's still around. But I saw these people in action who ousted Commodore's founder, Jack Tramiel, who was a Holocaust survivor, and take over the company from him, putting these people in charge who only half knew what they were doing. And they became the stewards of this wonderful Amiga technology, and they made weird decisions. Now, some would say good decisions, but I would say Yeah, in one way, you can always spin it that way, but if it has to be spun, if it's not so immediately obvious, shining with the light of truth, then I don't think, you're one to say that it turned out well with the dead end of the Amiga lineage, such as it were. Commodore was poor stewards of the Amiga computer. They killed it. Now, they killed it beautifully with the Amiga 2000, with the Zorro bus, which was an innovative thing, zero config, right? Hardware just figured out it was attached, and there was none of that IRQ setting or jumpers. The Amiga skipped over that whole agonizing phase of expansion bus computers, at least with the Amiga computer, thanks to Dave Haney mostly. But that was under instruction from engineering, who had some weird notions about how to make the Amiga popular. Basically try and turn it into a PC. Have PC Envy, make it a PC. That great big chassis did make it the perfect host for the video toaster. So who's to say, this wasn't the most interesting of all alternative futures, right? There were potential futures out there where the Amiga computer became the new mainstream computer, the way x86 PCs really did. And that didn't change until Unix-based Macintoshes showed the wisdom of being based on a real free and open source computer science-y kernel sort of thing, Unix. So Microsoft is inching in that direction, and before long, Windows will just be a proprietary shell on top of a Linux boot kernel, just the way Macs are a proprietary Cocoa display on top of a Unix boot kernel. So no one's going to keep proprietary stuff deep down there at the hardware, because there's no real advantage to it. Take advantage of the world knowledge, the free and open source software world, depending on the licenses, are so much more than just free and open source software, because that software can be put into running instances, and those instances can be kept running and re-invoked in one form or another with persistence, with that magic combination that you're looking for in a good RAID array system. A redundant set of hard drives is, well, self-describingly redundancy. You want your data in more than one place, and you want this to be done in parallel with as much synchronicity as possible, synchronizing them together. Sometimes synchronize, or it sounds worse than asynchronous, but you're talking about all the identical writes taking place across these systems at the same time. And sometimes that's what you want across, say, an actual running system and then a backup system. So even if lightning strikes your running system, you've got like an up to the microsecond copy of that can be just turned right back on and picked up where it left off, states and everything. If there's web sessions that were going on with tokens given out, that does not even reset. Such can be your redundancy and synchronicity between systems. That is going to make running systems generationally stable. Human lifetimes are going to be nothing compared to how long a program can be running. That's going to be a crossover well within our lifetimes. In fact, I plan on being part of that movement. And there's a lot of ingenuity to be brought to that challenge, because where's your code going to run? One of my more popular recent videos, it's an interesting question. Where's your code going to run? It's in a container. That container can be instantiated as a running instance on any hardware that matches its architectural target. So if you have an x86 machine whose host operating system has like container running stuff, LXD, you can just start running that system. It's a running system. There it is. It's almost not even a boot process. It's more like a snapshot, a come alive again snapshot, but with persistence. You got to be careful about your writes, right? Because you don't want to corrupt these things. But the file systems that these things are usually on are logging file systems, which means no write ever overwrites all data. It just keeps logging like a log file. And nothing is ever really lost, and everything has a history up until the time, I don't know, I gotta learn more about this, but I imagine there's an eat its tail time, because storage isn't infinite. So it has to eventually loop around, and the trick you're using with your not yet used hard drive space has to kind of yield itself for more writes when you're up to it. Okay, so anyway, real safe way to run systems on a generic Linux unit of computing that is approximately one Ubuntu server of version, say, 18.04 or newer. It's got to be a current long-term stable release. No, it's not LSR, it's LHD, something like that. But it's the long-term release. They pretty much assure they're going to do service packs and upgrades for the next few years. I forget the number. But then even that brings up an issue because, time will march on. We'll be up to Unix 2000 or something someday. So, or Ubuntu 2000 and something someday. So, there's going to be, host systems are going to be that much easier to provide. Every known host system will be easily archived and kept local. So you're just pairing things on the left up with stuff on the right. You have a bunch of running environments on the left. You got a bunch of containers on the right. So you can express it as running environment using container. It's a key value pair. And using a real key value pair language, use, circa 2021, Android with, the hardware. You would have to invoke the circa 1991, Linux capable running ARM64 hardware. And on the right, Android operating system version whatever. And you might have to have parameter values at that point because, size of the monitor, touchscreen capabilities, camera, expectations of GPS data, all kinds of things in order to decently emulate a piece of hardware. However, in the future, it's not going to be that much of a challenge. All those things necessary to emulate free and open source past hardware is going to be easily virtualized. Now, no matter how much I don't like virtualization today, that's not going to be that way forever. There's going to be a day when virtualization itself is a trivial task, stable, has all the same advantages as containerization. In fact, I expect by that time, all these distinctions will just go away because hardware could dynamically configure to be optimized. Stuff will have to be intentionally slowed down. And stuff that overcomes unstableness will probably have to be turned off to have the original experience. Who knows? Things will be guaranteed to run the way you expect them to run because that stuff in the free and open source world will be hammered on until instantiating it in the future is super fun and easy. And there's a community of people who do this with Amiga software still. It's their way of running Deluxe Paint. And if people have, fond memories of the good old days, mine were Deluxe Paint. I was a Deluxe Paint person. It came out from Electronic Arts, the same Electronic Arts as you know today, from all these big software games. But back then, they were very keen on the Amiga computer. sometimes as a target platform for their games, but more often as a development platform for making the graphics for other platforms, because Deluxe Paint was just that good. They made their own tool for designing their graphics, and everyone else in the industry used it for a while, and it made the Amiga computer a graphic design player, in the industry for a while, and then not pretty quickly afterwards. But it left in its wake a world of Amiga freaks like me, people who were like, wow, did that really just happen? Did that computer have all those capabilities and that performance and was such a wonderful creative platform and could let you multitask and run as much software as you could at once until you couldn't run anything for a few minutes while the system rebooted? Preemptive multitasking was a real kick. Things could preempt each other right into taking the whole system down. It was covered pretty well in this book I read, The Future Was Then, something like that. Future was then, the future was now, something. But anyway, it covered all the kooky decisions that were made for the Amiga computer, which made it the perfect expression of that day's, best technology that, cheap enough for home electronics had to offer. And it included a very Unix-like operating system with great graphics, and it struck a chord, and it made you feel like it was a musical instrument of great beauty that you could, make great music with. And you didn't even have to be a programmer. Just using Deluxe Paint, getting at one with the pixels and the graphics was almost a spiritual experience. Animated brushes, picking up a sequence of pictures and then using that flipping picture, that animated thing, like a hummingbird to draw with. Now that's almost an assumed in app software on our phones now these days, and it's never creative brushes you pick up to create your own anim brush. It's always built in and provided by the app these days. But that general effect is so, passe these days by today's hardware capabilities. But back then, it was pretty heady and amazing stuff to be able to do that. And then you could record all your creations out onto video because it was compatible with NTSC video, which was just an amazing thing. With a cheap device, about $100 or $200, you could get yourself a Genlock, and you could record all your video out to VHS tape. And if you had an even older Amiga that had color composite out, you could plug that directly into your VCR and record it just with a stock Amiga. Oh yeah, the Genlocks let you do punch-through graphics. It let you combine live video coming in through a video camera with computer graphics, so you could do effects like having, things fly around you, although you couldn't reach out and interact with them. That required the Mandela product, collision detection graphics and all that. Yeah, visual collision detection, all that stuff that is such a big deal. Object tracking, that's, all the rage today. 1997 at the latest. By the time it was like 1999, it was all over. The Amiga was fundamentally gone, but for the Amiga freaks and the various projects to keep it alive in different forms. But it left people like me utterly heartbroken, and only doubly so because not only did I, hang my hopes on having a future with this wonderful computing platform I discovered and fell in love with, the Amiga computing platform, I also was working for the company and was pinning my hopes on being a company man. You thought about those things in those terms back in those days. I was not nearly as entrepreneurial as others of my generation. In fact, I was a little bit anti-entrepreneurial, having run my dad's check cashing place for about a year, and been attacked and not having to be there every day and have the ultimate responsibility and be always on and literally have your life on the line if you're not always on. So I was reeling from that experience immediately after coming out of college. And I was like, no, thank you. Let me just work for people for a while. Thus repeating my dad's pattern that got him into that situation. However, he made some odd decisions that I would never make in my life. But he had no choice because his skills went obsolete. He couldn't just work for anybody, anywhere, anytime, and have his textile engineering skills, his quality assurance. My dad was a quality assurance engineer. No wonder. Oh my God, QA engineers. That just dawned on me. So my dad was a textile quality assurance engineer, and he went to examine plants, textile mills, and look at samples and make sure that everything was being produced to adequate, specifications to make all the customers around the world that this stuff got shipped to happy. And that skill is kind of a real snapshot of the times. Read Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers and return, okay? My dad was one of those New York textile Jews. He just didn't have the beard or the culture, and he preferred living in the suburbs of Philadelphia and drive commuting all the way into New York City and all the way out of New York City every day for 13 years, and it killed him. It killed him, for sure. So here I am, maybe twice a week, driving 2 hours in each direction on the round trip drop off and pick up my kid, and I'm loving it. I am 51 years old, and I am fairly certain I look and behave and think like a much younger man than my dad did at 51. I can recall my dad at 51 years old because my dad had me when he was about 40, and I had Addie when I was about 40. So Addie is becoming truly aware of her father as something other than, that mysterious dad thing with a very surface understanding of motivations and histories. For the first time, as well she should be, because her first quadrant of her 4 quadrants is up. So in life, we all are given 4 quadrants. Think about it as like the Star Trek quadrants: alpha, beta, gamma. Well, it's quadrants 1, 2, 3, 4. Keep it simple. And in each one of those quadrants, you have 5 dots laid out like the 5 dots on a domino, on the side of a domino. And each one of those is, she has not done a quadrant. That's a quarter life. She's just done the first 2 dots in a quadrant. Addie has finished the second dot. So it goes 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, 75, 80, 85, 90, 95, 100. So, I guess the 100th dot is outside that last dot. That's 5, 10, 15, 20 all together. 20 times 5. So, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, 90, 95, 100. 100 is the last dot, yeah. I got out of sync on the first time I counted my dots, right? The math works out. You got to double check yourself and verify. So counting by 5s in 4 quadrants, each quadrant's containing 5 dots, visualize that in your head. It's an easy picture to draw. You basically draw a box and you draw the lines to cut it into 4 quadrants. In each of those quadrants, you put 5 dots, 1 in each corner, 1 in the middle, like the side of a die, like the 5 dotted side of a dice. And that represents the life you should expect, the years you're at least trying to get, and maybe more and more so as technology improves. You should be the benefit of technology, better lifestyles, better products available, such that, 100 years is a pretty decent goal out of life. Try and get to it. Why wouldn't you? It lays out a life plan very well, and you can map exactly where you're at, and anything you get past that is a bonus. It's an extra, cherry on top of life. So Addie has gone 5-10. So I tell Addie she's out of her second dot. She's into her third dot on the first quadrant. Her old man just started the third quadrant. I'm in the third quadrant of life. I am no longer 50. I'm 51. So the way one divides life, I have now flipped from, depending on how you fill them in, but I visualize it the upper two and then the lower two, because you're building a solid foundation of a person and a soul, who you are, but you don't really finish it until the last day. And it's like a reverse game of Jenga. And I view life fairly much that way, so I see myself as only half a person still. A year into my completion of myself as a person. So I'm switching from much of an exploratory phase to an exploiting phase. Explore, exploit. Again, exploit sounds bad, but what better word for going with explore to represent, getting the benefit of wisdom and experience. Knowing your likes and your dislikes, getting more of your favorites, but keeping an open enough mind to things that you have not experienced yet. But in, the same, loosey-goosey mixed proportions as I've spent in the first 50 years. I have not been extremely, say, anally retentive about my goals. I have not been single-mindedly driven. I have stopped. I have taken detours. I've taken, surprising, detours. And have found some of the most important things to me, precious experiences about life, things that, if there's a final reckoning and you went back and you go, oh, I'm glad of the following, it would be on that list. Came on detours. The detours become the main features. And, there are no mistakes, because, a lot of things are relative. There is an absolutism somewhere down in there, and the absolutism is what keeps us on the vibrating edge, stable, interesting, but not immediately self-destroying. There cannot be stuff interesting enough to be of interest to things that are, sentient enough to enjoy it without a precarious dancing stability on a vibrating edge, on a front, on the meeting of two opposing forces, hot and cold, order and chaos, positive and negative, yin and yang. So many ways to express it. And the way life happens, where it happens in the universe, is a great example of it. Our kind of life is utterly on the vibrating edge. We're all quite fragile and mortal, yet we can do these YouTube video broadcasts to each other and communicate to each other, and things like this on a drive using just average in everybody's hands consumer electronic equipment which is becoming increasingly indistinguishable from magic, which is an issue in and of itself. I would really like to teach Addie, I would like to teach my people how things really work underneath and how it's a trick of simplification. How digital is not as analog as it looks. And the lessons that can be learned from that, the realities of the digital world versus the natural law, nature-given life, life such as us, and sentience, consciousness, human consciousness such as ours, versus, dare I use the word versus, as opposed to, that's even worse, in comparison to the inevitable kind of digital life we will be able to create. Now, some of it will be digital, running in software on the types of circuits, generic units of computing, but more like neural network generic units. So generic units of computing will move from what we use today, these Linux virtual machines or containers that closely match the state of computing in whatever, 2020, with a little modern computer architecture that can be instantiated as a new computer running and destroyed as, it's not mapped as to the real hardware anymore. And instead of that, those units are too big, they're too chunky, and they're too specific. It's a Linux operating system in particular. There should be more generic APIs for computing underneath that can have different operating systems. So the operating system itself is not so important, but rather the services that are provided by the operating system, and then you size that to fit as a neural network. Lower capability, less expensive hardware nodes, more of them running on some sort of bus that allows communication from any to any instantaneously. That's a decent starting point. There's plenty more to it than that, but that's only just a raw starting point. Neural networks as a generic unit of computing, as a substrate that's measured in cubic units of the stuff, is probably already here. I imagine as a common practice in our lifetimes. And, we'll think of it as like brain matter, the gray matter, how many cubic units of gray matter, that'll become the new, gigabytes or, gigahertz. How much storage capacity and how fast. These things are kind of going to go hand in hand because it will be universal memory, because when you kill power to it, it'll come back to the exact same state as where it left off, even considering how blazingly fast its internal parts are. It might even be optical computers, because at that point, it's better to have photons zipping around in logic gates than it is to have electrons zipping around in silicon. Semiconductor, by its very definition and nature, produces heat. Semiconductor. Sometimes it conducts, sometimes it doesn't. Wait, what happens when it doesn't? Heat. So that's why computers have to be cooled and are not necessarily the optimal, physics behind computing. In our brain, there's probably several ways. But we're only using, one way for the most part today in computing. That's semiconducting silicon wafers, which is glass. It's crystallized glass doped with various substances, because silicon on its own is not conductive. It's not even semiconductive. I think it's non-conductive, right? Glass is an insulator. That's why you dope it with something to make it semiconductive. And optical circuits probably will run probably do. I think this is in the labs, right? If not even in real production. I compare things to the Bobaverse a lot because Bobaverse has a lot of, well thought out science behind things. And their computing units that run their virtual, souls, the things that can boot up a copy of a human and make it a running copy of a human consciousness, are optical in nature. Optical, digital optical. Can you even call it electronics? It's photo-optical tronics, something of that sort. But anything that can be used in a switch or a gate, anything that can have the basic relay trick, the water canal lock trick. Where else is it used? Vacuum tubes do it. It's basically the transistor trick. You got two things going in. One has a positive pressure, the other is where it would flow out of. But the third thing coming in regulates it and says, oh, you can flow or you cannot flow. So these things work as, when strung together in certain ways, they work as logic gates. You get AND gates, you get NAND gates, and eventually you get a half adder, and you string them together and you get adders. And you build up computers from out of this. Amazingly, computers are built up from, the same thing as basic river canal locks. Because the water's coming in from the river, there's a canal going off to the side, but you can't have a boat go from the river directly into the canal. There has to be a holding point where they can go in while the water's completely filled, and then they shut it off from the river, and then they open it up to the canal after the water levels equalize, and then the boat goes off into the canal. The types of locks that are used there are the same basic locks as the switches behind digital electronics, and I guess in more sci-fi terms, phototronics, and anything that has computing power, anything that you can build computers as we know it out of. And I have to add, as we know it, because there's so much more going on, even in our own brains, than we understand. We used to think that, there's a nerve cell, and, they are sending and receiving messages from places, but they don't do much thinking on their own. Well, it turns out various nerve cells work a lot more like a complete brain. Remember all that self-similarity? In previous videos I talked about self-similarity. One of the self-similarity things is things that think. And so every single nerve cell, maybe arguably every single cell in your body, has something that's working kind of sort of like your brain in your head. And you are a large version of a one-cell organism. You're a bunch of cells gathering together to say, hey, if we made a larger, more capable robot version of ourselves, what would it look like? And we have the nucleus in the center, our brain, and something that works like a heart. You have all the same basic body components on a per cell basis as you do in your whole physical body. Your body is a self-similar copy as a single cell from your body. And one would think that a cell from a body is a self-similar copy of something that occurs much smaller inside of it, perhaps a molecule, and so on down to a proton and the quarks that build them. And they all snap together, and they all like to stay certain distances from each other, and they go into some sort of orbit, and circles are some sort of fundamental, because things being in orbit around each other suddenly defines a lot about stuff, especially if more than one thing is in orbit around more than one thing. You now at least have the relative frame of a existence, and relativity would have us think that everything is relative to each other, and there are no fixed frames of reference in the universe, in existence. And then there's all this talk about this quantum foam popping in and out of existence. Oh yeah? By what coordinate system? So, and then we're starting to notice effects that, quantum foam is involved in, to measure, to even verify that it's actually there, but by which large amounts of the stuff together works as if it were real particles. I think in the news recently, the quantum foam virtual particles participated in the creation of real matter, reversing E equals mc squared. So Einstein says E equals mc squared, and first the atomic bomb demonstrated that, and then the hydrogen bomb really demonstrated that. Yet still, that was all the release of energy from the matter state. We have not created the matter from the energy state up until very recently, as these science announcements would have us believe. Maybe it happened, maybe it didn't, but it involved and presumably relied upon and further verified the existence of virtual particles in the creation of matter from energy. And if that's the case, and quantum foam is further verified as a real thing, i.e. Particles that greatly resemble single photons of light, the smallest wavelength of matter we know, not of matter, the smallest wavelength of energy we know, perhaps the pixel of existence, the smallest thing from which anything can be made, those are popping in and out of existence all around us as quantum foam, and can presumably have interaction with other matter. Now, the having interaction with other matter is of great interest to me, and working together as a group is of great interest to me, because that would imply a coordinate system, because virtual particle A is coming into existence in some relation to virtual particle B. It can't all be a relative universe and relative velocities. Nothing has motion except as it exists in relation to another object. Hard to believe. It's easier to believe that there's some absolute coordinate system, even if it's warped. It's not necessarily like an evenly distributed ruler, because space-time bends. But no matter how space-time bends and compresses and twists, the dots that comprise it get compressed together, get expanded out, such that those dots always remain proportionately in relationship to each other. There's no reason you can't have an infinitely stretchy and squishy universe with that stretching and squishing almost not being noticed by those that are made up of the stuff within it, such as the distances between particles are such that, right? That's why that's why the protons and neutrons in the center of atoms are really so tiny compared to the atom itself and the electron probability fields that orbit it. Ridiculously so. And it demonstrates we've got a lot of space to work with. Our stage is very, 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 very large. It's a large stage. And there's very little stuff spread across that large stage, such that vast inefficiencies can be made in how that space is used, so that the laws and properties of reality are, come out the way you want them to come out. So that things have to happen en masse to have any effect at all, such that such preponderances of stuff need to be accumulated and put together to be interesting in any way, such that enough of the stuff has to get put together so that gravity wells can occur and the stuff can be held together floating in space. and in such a way that enough of the stuff going together, compressing, will start to produce churn and heat, and thus some sort of turbulence is created, and you got stars, and you got, explosions, and you got, things being compressed more than would normally be possible. Probably such effects as resonance kick in, so that higher energy levels can be spiked in small locations than anyone expected possible, such that bifurcation can play its magic role, and things can be, multiplied by itself again and again, and to get numbers that are so incalculably large that can no longer be predicted. And then you got chaos theory, and then the universe becomes statistical in nature, because it's much easier to just step back and look at things and to anticipate their behavior based on, probability of how much you've seen things happen certain ways at that scale before, such that the idea of calculating it down at that quantum level to create larger scale predictions becomes so laughable, as to the point of, it's hubris, it's scientific hubris. You can never know initial conditions. You must zoom back and look at things statistically from a distance to not have to have another copy of the universe to calculate the outcome of the universe. That would just be silly. So to make accurate calculations, you zoom out along with the rest of creation and the creative process until you get to that human scale, and you do your best as some sort of immortal light being existing down at the single photon level, popping into the universe to take a peek or to make bets to perchance become part of it. To have any meaningful participation in, what it just joined. It's so small compared to the rest of it. Why would the particles of light even wish to pop into this universe? And one has to question, well, on average, they choose to not to after Planck instant. And they say, thank you very much, I'll be out of here. But every once in a while, probably they hang around and they start to participate in things, and they get promoted from a virtual particle to a real particle. And hence the unpredictability of whether an expanding universe or contracting universe, and why it really doesn't matter. If it were all really one of those super squishy membranes, three-dimensional, squishy membrane, and I guess the action of stretching and squishing on the fourth dimension of time, but not distributed evenly throughout, because, but the stretching and squishing applies to time itself as well. So somehow or other, that lump of stuff, stretching and squishing as it does, becomes a stable, because of life, art form. It stabilizes. Certain harmonics are hit, certain parameters of non-destruction. The filter events have taken everything out in the ring above it and the ring below it. So you're in the magical orbiting ring of the Goldilocks zone, not just where water can exist, but where things don't all kill each other all the time at a certain technological level just because, or are incapable of saving themselves when an asteroid comes a calling, just because that's the way they are as bickering reptiles, as we might turn out to be. Chances not. Chances mammal. Chances enough mammal without cat-like regression, because felines are reptilianly regressed mammals who, if they inherited the universe, one would not like to be a pet of a cat, I would assume. I'd rather be a pet of a monkey than a pet of a cat. Because with a cat, you're most likely going to be food eventually after you've run your course as a pet. But with monkeys, you have a chance, maybe, I don't know, set loose because you can empathize. Empathy is a thing. Empathy is a mammalian thing. Higher order in the Maslow pyramid of self-actualization. Many individuals get stuck in the food, clothing, and shelter, lower levels of the Maslow pyramid. And that's life for them, period. And they think that they're not stuck there, but they're reptilian in nature. They really don't have empathy, and they're too smart for their own good. Cheaters. Ambush predators. Ambush predation is a prime strategy of reptiles because it's so highly effective and it takes so little energy put into it and just enough smarts to do it. So when you see ambush predation, you see a reptile brain. So be on the lookout for logs sticking up out of the water that are really snouts, right? And once caught by one, always know the signs, always know how to recognize them, and have your strategies for dealing with them, because they ain't going away. Humans and mammals of all kinds who realize that ambush predation is the way to go are always going to statistically be around in any population. So just be forewarned and have strategies for dealing with them when you encounter them. As you go up through the pyramid of self-actualization, most people at the bottom, right? That's most people at the bottom, food, clothing, and shelter. The wage earners, the poor people, and most of the middle class, honestly. But you go the next level up and you go to those people who find a sense of community and belonging and purpose. A little overrated, not so overrated, but a little overrated. Find yourself on the inside. Go for not independence, because independence is a fallacy, but being able to entertain yourself is a superpower. Absolutely. Being able to entertain yourself, to keep yourself busy, to keep your mind occupied, to continue to be creative and inventive, even while bored, even perchance without electronics, is a superpower. Superpower for sure. So learn how to express yourself, learn how to use your spoken language, learn how to use some other languages. If you can learn programming like Python, and if you can learn math, algebra, trigonometry, analysis, maybe try some calc. Calc defeated me, talking about things that defeated me. Calc and physics defeated me. I was part of the great shakeout, the 101, 102 shakeout. Because, engineers have to be comfortable enough with math such that they don't start doing dishonest things later in their career and faking it, then a whole lot of people die. So engineers really need to be good at math, and then as that engineering field progresses, your brain becomes chemically altered, and it's not a good or a bad thing. It's like, one thing that, pisses me off or triggers me when people say healing and getting back to. There's no getting back to. Healing is not a matter of getting back to. Healing is a matter of callousing over and having either calluses that remain or perhaps a scar, and certainly a memory, right? Healing is a matter of learning and growing from that experience, and to forever be a new individual that you invented and you layered on yourself under your own self-direction, and to become a brave new you. The world you die in is going to be unrecognizable from the world you were born into, and it's always that way for every generation, most of the time. Some are unfortunate to be born in the dark ages and such, periods that last thousands of years. But for the most part now, with the progress of technology and the ways that are going to be taken to keep apocalypses from knocking us back to the Stone Age, believe me, it's not over for good. There's going to be enough, glass crystal arc reboot kits out there that, you know, we're gonna know how to make power generators from natural power sources, you know, a couple hundred years after disaster, barring the radiation. Okay, don't let me get into it too much, but you know, humans are adaptable. Humans always find a way. So the idea is to know now today all the basic tricks that go into that reboot of society, and to never have to do it. It's like driving a Jeep. I talk to my wife Nat, and we laugh about it. You know, I sympathize with a friend who has car problems, whose car, you know, has gone into disrepair because it wasn't taken care of. And it's really hard medicine, certain things, especially burning out an engine. Nothing sucks like burning out an engine. I hear sound in the back. There is definitely one of the electronic players playing somewhere in the car. Very odd. I'll check on it later. It's a safe thing to do. I'm just going to keep forging ahead with this video because I'm pleased with it, and my storage space has amazingly not run out. But maybe I will wind it up because it's been an hour and 20 minutes, so why not? So I was talking about those dots, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, 90, 95, 100. 100 years, you will be lucky to have had it in your life. Target that, go for it. It's a noble goal. A lot of people fall far short of it, even while still having achieved so much in life. So imagine how much more greatness can be achieved by people who need that first 50 years to just say, hi, how you doing to life. I am one of those people. I only now have acquired that sort of, you know, I don't know what it is, the ability to switch from the explore phase to the exploit phase recently enough that I can feel those changes. Maybe I'm coming back from an interesting detour, but an interesting detour that gave me many of the greatest gifts in life I have ever received. So I have to view it not really as a detour, but my best, main, and most truest path. For those who are a fan of Rick and Morty, you know, I'm becoming the most Rickest Rick. I'm becoming the most Mikest Mike, because these challenges do define us. That is the vibrating of the vibrating edge, of the things that make life interesting. If you peak too soon, you are denied these chances for growth. It's like you're spayed or neutered. You become that kitten. You become locked in that place you were in your head at the time you achieved the success, because everything after that is just do that, repeat that trick. That worked for me. And that's why so many people who, upon asking what was the secret of your success, say, you know, luck played a large part to do with it. And then of course the masses who didn't achieve success take great consolation going, see there, Steve Jobs, you know, they say luck. And not Steve Jobs, he didn't say luck so much. It was Bill Gates who said luck had a lot to do with it. And probably luck had a lot more to do with it for Bill Gates than it did with Steve Jobs. So when there's passion, and that passion shapes what you do, and it's what the world needs, and you can make money from it, you achieve a Kagi. Steve Jobs achieved a Kagi in his life and then died far short of the number of years that should have been allocated to him. But he did far better than those who died during their great 28s. At 27, you worry and you panic and you go into your great creation. At 28, you feel like you should have your first fortune under your belt and your first magnum opus published. And those who feel deeply often clock out when they don't, because that's how that works. And those who survive can go different routes at that point. You have to decide how you think. Are you one of those dweebs who think you've peaked by 30 and the rest is downhill? Well, epigenetics, my friend. If you tell yourself that, enough times for long enough that will be true. And you will Homer Simpsonify yourself. But if you tell yourself very much the opposite, and continue to tell yourself the opposite, then you will stay young. Now, perhaps it has something to do with gene expression. Maybe the predisposition needs to already be in your genes for there to be a young you to express. Young gene expression and projection is one thing. And it's the thing one should really hope for. And I'm dying to see what that audio is playing, but I will wait to get off of my exit before I do it. Because I'm still on the highway, and some of the rules in my head while I do these videos is no risks. My driving cannot be one bit less on game while I shoot video while driving than it is without shooting video. And the human brain, the way it is wired, is perfectly capable of that. In fact, one would argue keeping one side of your brain active keeps the other side of your brain active, and you do not get velocitized, right? So we're coming on an hour and a half, and this is probably a pretty good place to wrap up. I am done quadrant 2, and I'm heading into my third quadrant. I'm on the first dot of quadrant 3. Addie's on the third dot of quadrant 1. That is a very effective way to measure how far along you are in your life, and how many years you should expect to have left, and as good productive years, because I am a funnel person. I'm doing this YouTube stuff, and I'm staying alive all this time because of constant little rules that are running in my head, kind of like the new normal, kind of like the human body is adaptive and it gets used to things, kind of like the chipped tooth in your mouth that you've lived with for far longer than you probably should have, because the human body can get used to it. And here I coming to a red light, and I will take advantage of it. Come to a full stop, take a peek in the back, see what's playing, and hope that I don't have any of Addie's electronic devices she would like to have. Zero risks, so this is probably a great place to wrap up the video now, for real. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.